Good afternoon. It's always a pleasure to be involved in a event with the Councils of Real Estate. I've had the pleasure of being a counselor going on, I don't know, 10 years now, maybe about 10 years, and um, it's an amazing organization. So those of you who are members, it's a pleasure to be a counselor with you, and for those who aren't, what are you waiting for? Come on in. Um, we have a great uh, panel today to talk about the housing markets, particularly kind of comparing and contrasting two major markets in the U.S. And when I went through the qualifications, I was like, wow, what a privilege it is to be able to moderate this panel. So maybe I'll start with our esteemed speakers. Gay Corraton is a counselor of real estate. She's also a CBE, a certified business economist. She's the chief economist for the Miami Realtors. She's a distinguished economist with over 20 years of experience in macroeconomic research, housing, and commercial real estate research. Next, we have Dr. Lisa Stravant, PhD, who's the chief economist for Bright MLS, the largest multiple listing service in the US. And lastly, but definitely not least, James Costello III, CRE, and also CBE, and he's the head of real estate economics and chief economist for MSCI Real Assets, formerly Real Capital Analytics, with over 3 decades of economic analysis and research experience in the commercial and multifamily markets. So we have a great panel, and we had a call the other day talking about what we're going to talk about, and what we were going to talk about took the whole hour to talk about. So clearly there's a lot to talk about, and we're going to try to be focused during this next hour. So maybe if I could start with Gay, if you could just maybe do a little bit better job than I did talking about what you're doing now, and maybe we can talk about migration, which is clearly one of the topics that people are thinking about, one of the many topics people are thinking about today.
Yeah, so first of all, good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here on this panel. I don't think I need to say much about myself other than to say that I'm chief economist of Miami Realtors, and prior to that, I was with the National Association of Realtors for 10 years, and I had a job back in the Philippines. Anyway, talking about migration, yes, one of my favorite topics of research, because I love to look at what is driving housing and commercial real estate demand. And at the end of the day, right, at a point in time, you see where the market is, but for you to see where it's going, you need to look at those drivers. So migration, we are in Southeast Florida, and when I say Southeast Florida, I'm referring to Miami-Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, Martin, and St. Lucie County. We are continuing to see a elevated out-of-state migration compared to the levels that we saw in 2019. I'm looking at, I quarterly track, I track on a quarterly basis driver's license exchanges. And from that data, as I said, we are continuing to see elevated migration levels from New York, about 25,000 driver's license exchanges. New York is still the #1 source, but we've also actually seen the greater increase from people moving from California. So several other indicators do show that there is also this continuing migration. The other data that I looked at was the job-to-job flows published by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And I hope we get an updated report soon. But based on the first quarter of 2024 data, again, the #1 state that is the feeder state for people moving for jobs, specifically moving into the Miami metro area, is New York. And then you have New Jersey, and also California, and also Texas, those states. Now, it's not just the number that has increased, it's also the quality of the jobs based on that job to job flows data, I'm seeing more jobs from the professional technical services category. Just to be specific, over the period 2015 to 2019, just about 5% of the job flows from New York metro area to the Miami metro area were in professional and technical services. 2020 to 2024, the professional and technical services made up about 15% of the job flows. So there is that shift in the quality of jobs. So yes, that's what I'm continuing to see. And on top of that, of course, with a shift in the quality of jobs, you're also seeing that these jobs are your higher paying jobs. Of course, on the other hand, we are seeing an outflow of the lower paying jobs, particularly those in accommodation and food services. And I think that will touch on the affordability issue that we will discuss later.
Okay, thank you. Lisa, I guess with the DC metro area and the area that you're focused on, what are you seeing on the migration side as well?
Yeah, we're really paying close attention here in the Washington area to what's going on with the federal government. And I've been with Bright MLS here for 3.5 years. I was with Virginia Realtors for several years, but before that, I worked for George Mason University and was really doing a deep dive into the economic, transportation, and housing issues in the greater Washington, D.C. area. And I'll say this, the D.C. area is no stranger to federal government shutdowns. We live through these things. We have lived through administrations on the Republican side, the Democratic side. We've lived through a whole lot of things here in the Washington area. Things feel different, right? And we hear a lot about how the federal government affects the housing market, and generally changes in administration is kind of a wash in the housing market. People move in, move out. What we're seeing in our market is that, as Gay was mentioning about the job growth in the Miami-Dade area, the federal government is a really important segment of the Washington area economy. About 14% of workers in the DC area are federal government employees. So we have about 200,000 federal government workers in the DC area. On top of that, we have an estimated 400,000 private sector workers who work on federal government contractors. It is a big deal when there are changes in the federal government that create uncertainty. And so when we talk about migration, I think one thing we're watching is, despite some hyperbole in social media back in February, we're not seeing a surge of people leaving the DC metropolitan area, but we are seeing people making decisions. We're seeing inventory increase much faster in the DC area than in some other mid-Atlantic markets. We're seeing, according to surveys with our real estate agents in our market, folks who are close to retirement who work for the federal government have been more eager to list their homes for sale and to leave the region. And I think as we look at migration patterns in our market, uncertainty around federal government employment, uncertainty around the federal government generally, I think is going to, and frankly, a reduction in international immigration is going to reduce the number of folks moving into the Washington area. I think we're going to see more folks leaving out. And frankly, looking ahead, there's a lot of strong fundamentals in the DC area housing market, but I do anticipate a soft 2026 in terms of housing demand, simply because of what's going on with the federal government.
Thanks, Lisa. Before asking Jim his thoughts from more of a national lens, I'm just curious, one of the things that might be different this time is taking departments that have always been based in the DC area and talk about relocating them to other parts of the country. Is that starting to show up anywhere, or what's the view on that?
So I think the difference is, we have, I've lived in the DC area for 30 years, and I always remember conversations about moving this agency out or moving that agency out. What is different now is that we have an administration that doesn't follow sort of traditional rules and patterns of making decisions. And I think it's that uncertainty that some of these things that frankly are kind of always in the ether might actually come to fruition, because some of the checks and balances that have held other administrations back may not be working in the same way. So yeah, I do think that this idea of not just layoffs, but of wholesale moving agencies out of the district or out of the DC area is a bigger deal now than in the past, but still feels very far away in terms of actually happening.
Forget about the politics of that for a moment, though.
Sure.
And it's.
And I don't think I mentioned anything about politics, just about.
I know you didn't, but it gets tied up in it because you got a different administration that's just thinking about things in a different way.
Sure.
But imagine if you would, that the federal government was a business and responding to shareholders, quarterly earnings and calls and all that.
Sure.
In that kind of a world, they would have already moved a lot of labor out of the DC area to lower cost locations throughout the United States. I mean, the trends that Gay was talking about of more folks leaving New York and California, moving to Florida, that's part of a long-term thing that's been happening. Bill Wheaton, who I used to work with, he wrote a paper. Well, he didn't write a paper on it. He thought it was just too simple to even write a paper. But he was able to dig up employment data back to the 1950s. It used to be something like 40 to 50% in the 1950s of all financial sector jobs in the United States were on the island of Manhattan. And then the introduction of high-tech tools like fax machines, cheap long-distance phone calling, it allowed you to put lower value-add economic activity in other markets. Take your call center operation, put it in New Jersey where it's cheaper, and then you can hire folks in at a lower wage rate. That's that same, some people are like, oh, this is all different. This is all new. COVID's changing things. I look at it, it's the same thing of the profit maximization that firms have. You keep the big swinging wallets, as Michael Lewis might not say, in New York, but then you send the lower, the clerical, the administrative stuff into low-cost markets in Florida, or increasingly low-cost markets like Monterey, the Philippines, Mumbai. The federal government hasn't had that same pressure, but moving the government around, it can work. Look at what happened in Korea. The motivations there were different. All the government was in Seoul. It's a big risk if a Rocket Man gets an idea or two. So they had to move things around. You go visit NPS, you're going down to Jeonju and riding a train far better than any American high-speed train to get there. Even better than the Bright Line, which I love. And that transition has helped, and it creates some buy-in too across the country, because it's not just one big government in DC, it's the government all around the country. So if they were a private company, they would have already faced these kind of pressures to move out of a high-cost location like DC into secondary and tertiary areas where some of the jobs really don't need to see members of Congress and lobbyists every day, so the co-location doesn't really help them anymore.
I just want to say that the government is not a business, though, and
I know
that's
it's not a business.
So I just think we just need to be. I just wanted somebody to say that out loud. So it's different decision making. It's
different decision making, but in terms of just thinking, just from a management perspective of how do you run it at the lowest cost, there's some activity that does not need to be right near the center of power. It can. There are people who absolutely have to get over to Congress and talk with the representatives and visit with various firms over in K Street. But not every job needs that. And for those other jobs, it may make sense to hire some of that labor in other markets that just are lower cost.
I think, I also live in the, if I may jump into this, I work for Miami Realtors, but I also do live in the DC area. I think that is happening, Jim, right? And I think like the big HUD building, Housing and Urban Development building, I think there's a plan to sell that, or because the workforce is being downscaled. So I think some of those properties are actually on the market to be sold. Of course, that will affect, also the, as you said, once that is sold, that can be converted into something else, right? Who knows, right? Maybe there'll be a tear down and you could put some multifamily building there. But I think some of that is happening on some scale. Yeah.
It's interesting because it seems like part of what has always been the case and always talked about, maybe because of the players today, it may actually change a little bit, whereas in the past it kind of didn't. But and that's hard to measure, right? How do you speculate on what the trend might be if there was always these starts and then that didn't happen? We're going to do it. No, we didn't do it this time. So Jim, from the perspective of a more national level, are there any trends in migration? Maybe something that, big ones that you're seeing, and maybe something that would surprise people to hear about migration trends for people moving to a different part of the country.
The narrative had been that, everyone's going to leave New York and California and go to lower cost locations. But you get some challenges with that. Like some personal information. I bought a house in St. Petersburg, Florida. I still live in Brooklyn, but I'm there enough where people jokingly call me Florida man. But me owning that house there, I am effectively crowding out somebody else. I'm competing with people who want homes in St. Petersburg who have jobs tied to wages generated from businesses in St. Petersburg. And, you can make a lot more working in the financial sector in Manhattan, if your job has to be in Manhattan, than somebody who can be doing something remote in another location. So it's the migration kind of stuff. You do have issues of people being priced out of areas. Folks I talk to, like at the coffee house that I like to go to in my neighborhood. Some folks have picked up. One family I knew picked up and moved back to Kentucky because they were slowly being priced out of the area because of just so many other folks kind of bidding up the value. But in some sense, the bidding up the value of the real estate, that's also just an indictment of the sheer difficulty we have of building new supply in this country. Our friends at the NMHC have estimated that the regulatory burden alone adds something like 40% to the cost of building apartment units on average. And then you get other areas that are going to be much higher with busybody local development boards preventing decent housing from coming in. And so the housing costs themselves that were at one point, a buddy of mine who moved to St. Petersburg for high school friend, he moved there in 2003 after the internet boom, was buying homes for $20,000-$30,000 each. Now he's selling them off for like $400,000-$500,000 each. That kind of transition in prices is pricing people out that had more modest incomes in the past.
Sure, migration, there's migration, but I think there is still that difference, right? So Miami-Dade, the median price is about 650,000. DC, Lisa, I think it's also about that, right? But New York, the median price is about what? New York City or San Francisco, 800, $1 million. So there is still that differential. And in terms of rent, you rent an apartment in New York, it's about what, 5,000. Miami, it's about 3,000. San Francisco, maybe 4,000. So that difference, which still exists, and even for office, right? That differential is still continuing to push migration, I think, into the Sun Belt. That differential has, of course, narrowed, but it is still there. And I think until that differential really evens out, then we'll start to see migration. And again, I don't want to sound political. With this. And as I said, I do understand the objective of Mayor-elect Mamdani in improving the lives of the people in New York, but with the tax differential rising, just say corporate tax, 5.5% in Florida. New York, it's now 7.5%, but he wants to match it to New Jersey's 11.5%. Right there, you have that, big corporate tax, and if you're talking about profit maximization, right? you will certainly, I think, see that out migration from New York into the lower cost areas, the Carolinas, Florida, Texas, Arizona. And so just in terms of the outlook, that's one of the factors we're looking at why we are, me as the economist, am more optimistic that we could see more migration in 2026, 2027. And of course, that will also bolster the demand for housing and for other types of commercial real estate, multifamily, office, industrial, retail.
I mean,
Yeah, I do want to address Mondami for just a second. Let me read you something that I saw the other day. The Democrat won election in November, vowing to close the growing gap between wealthy New Yorkers who enjoy a life of luxury and the poor and middle class. 1/3 of the city's rental households pay at least half of their income on rent, according to the Rent Guideline Board. That was a statement written about Mayor de Blasio back when. It wasn't about Mondami, and de Blasio came in with many of the same pronouncements as Mondami is. But then there's a reality. People have been pointing this picture that, oh, New York is going to die. He's going to push everybody out. But, it's wildly speculative at this point. People are speculating on the outcomes of speculations of what policy is actually going to be. So I'm not sure you can really say that, oh, everyone's going to leave New York and go there. We've seen this game before. So I'm not sure yet that happens. And also, some of it's just silly, like the governor of New Hampshire saying that, oh, I'm going to try and convince Manhattan businesses to come to New Hampshire. I mean, what, Goldman Sachs is going to pick up and move to New Hampshire? That's just bonkers. There's not a labor base to support the critical investment infrastructure of the United States. Now, at the margins, there is some lower value add activity that is moving to other cities. And some of it, the lower value add activity, it's not just call center stuff anymore. In Texas, in Dallas, Goldman Sachs, not picking on Goldman Sachs, it's just they're like a poster child of the New York Investment Bank. They have a brand new facility under construction, and they're moving some MDs down there. And that just kind of makes sense for someone to be there, because the clients that they want to help, the businesses that they want to help access the capital markets are there and are growing. So it makes sense for them to have those folks there, to be so close to their prospective clients. But that, in a way, doesn't hurt the parent company. That just helps the parent company as well, because they're just closer to clients and there's growth. So I don't view it as like, one or the other. It's more of a network effect, what parts of the node are growing, which nodes on the network are growing. But there's certain areas where you can be in that world, and the cost and taxation things aren't really the critical driver. It's where are your clients and where's the talent you need. And there's a lot of hyperbole about this new mayor that I think is less analytic driven and more just trying to bash someone they don't like.
Yeah, the song from The Who, meet the new boss, same as the old boss.
It coming from the guy with the guitars on the wall, that makes sense.
That sound better on the wall. There's a question that came in about Miami and the population trends, the kind of a migration 2020 to 2024, which was a reduction, and maybe pointing to the expense of being there. So, I think it applies to both markets. So maybe, Gay, starting with you, the influx of people and the price point, where is most of this growth coming from in terms of the price point of housing? And same question for Lisa.
Sorry, the growth in housing?
Yeah, the price point. Now, we talked about just like the luxury markets is
Okay,
really where a lot
okay.
of the growth is, and it seems like the question is, it's expensive to be in these places.
Yes. The luxury market at a time when mortgage rates, at a time of elevated mortgage rates, right, compared to the one that we had in 2020, 2021 before mortgage rates reset. So when mortgage rates rose, you saw, of course, affordability taking a hit, and prices since 2019 in South Florida have increased by about 70%. Meanwhile, your wages have just increased by about 33%. So it would be those, right, who can afford, who would make up an increasing share of the market. And so that is what happened. The $1 million segment share as of September, the latest data in Miami-Dade, those $1 million homes now make up 26% of the market. 2019, they only made up 8%. So that's like 3 times. A luxury market, a luxury home now used to be the million was the benchmark. And today it's about 3.5 million. That's the threshold for the top 5%. The threshold for the top 1% is 10 million. But I just attended a global conference and at Miami, and you hear brokers talking about selling a $70 million home, an $80 million home. So the demand for that the source of demand for that are likely your out-of-state buyers because they're earning more. Again, in a comparison of the IRS data, the Internal Revenue Service data on tax returns coming from moving from another place to live in Florida versus those tax returns of people just living in Florida, out-of-state movers definitely have a much higher income than in-state. So that's one, and I've already spoken about New York, California and New Jersey being the top 3 states of origin for people moving to Florida. The second are your international buyers. Again, we just did a global report. So this is data provided by our brokers about 37 new condo construction. These are like $1 million plus per unit. 52% of those are foreign buyers. And of those, 86% are coming from Latin America. So a lot of the luxury market is being driven essentially by the wealth flowing in. I think based on that estimate, 9.2 billion in household income was the wealth that flowed in 2022 from New York alone, 9.2 billion. I think 45 billion for the entire metro area from other states. So those are really your drivers for the luxury market.
Yeah, we've seen something similar in the DC market. The luxury market really has been driving home sales activity over the last 12 months. We've seen a slowdown in sort of your entry level and mid-level markets. We've been seeing year-over-year median price growth, but when you if you break it out, there's actually not an increase in home prices by price segment. It's just that there are a disproportionately high number of sales in the higher end this year compared to a year ago. And that really is reflected also, kind of tying this back to migration a little bit. When we look at the DC metro area and population growth and population change, we have been consistently losing people between the ages of 25 and 34, right, which is that segment that we often look at with census data, and very much tied to that presumed age of wanting to get into home ownership, wanting to purchase a home. And so when we look at the outmigration of that young adult population in their late 20s, early 30s, you can see them going to places like Richmond and going to places like the Carolinas, as we were talking about these lower cost places, because affordability has really become a major constraint on the market. And this comes at the same time that we heard from NAR that the average age of a first-time home buyer hit 40. And so I think about this a lot. I think about if you're 40 and you're buying your first home, you're probably not looking for a studio condo down by Georgetown, right? You're probably looking for something in the single family variety. And when you're talking about a place like the DC Metro, or I presume the Miami region, purchasing a single family home at any sort of price point that is easy to get into is getting increasingly hard. In the DC, in Northern Virginia, The median price of a single family detached home is over $1 million now. So if you want to buy, if you want to live in Arlington County, Fairfax County, Alexandria, close-in suburbs, even Loudoun County, Virginia, which is further out, is getting much more expensive. It is really being driven by folks who are higher income, who are able to drive those home prices out, and that entry-level market is basically non-existent. I did a little analysis. If you want to buy a home in Northern Virginia under $500,000, 90% of the listings available are studio or one-bedroom condominiums. And so that's not even with like the condo fee on top of that. So thinking about who's in and who's out in terms of driving the housing market, I concur with Gay that the luxury market has really been quite robust, quite resilient. Higher income folks have felt more economically and financially secure this past 12 months, where lower income and more moderate income buyers are hitting those affordability ceilings, are feeling a little less confident. We know from the consumer confidence numbers. And the question is, how does that play out in 2026? Will that luxury buyer still, drive the market? And will the more moderate income buyers catch up?
In Miami, the based on the just the salaries, the average weekly wage, a two-earner household, this is already a two-earner household, will earn about 120,000. And based on the current median price, they can afford a home in the 400,000 range, about 420,000. What percent of homes in Miami-Dade are worth 420,000 and below? Just 5%. 5% of homes, and you count them. That's like 200 homes. It's that market is wiped out. It's gone. 2019, that 400,000 homes are about 50% of the market. They're just about 5% now. And yeah, so I wonder too. We keep talking about affordability, but at the end of the day, because there's also the seller side, right? I mean, will sellers, right now, they purchased a home. Right now, the value of their home is about 650,000, right? Or maybe even higher. Are you really thinking that they're going to sell that home at 400,000? No way, right? They build up all this equity. So that is going to be the price point that they'll sell. And right now, those homes, they make up 70% of the market. There's very little affordable homes on the market that are affordable for most folks. And I don't think we can see the existing home market as providing that solution, because sellers won't obviously sell their home at a loss. And in fact, what they're doing is renting out their property, right? I see a lot here like, oh, there's a home for rent, 2 homes for rent, but they're not being sold because it makes sense for me also, talking about Jim's point of profit maximization, right? And it just makes sense, I can rent this a house, right? And accumulate equity and get the rent. Like, why will I sell it, right? Unless there's really a hassle for me to keep renting out the home. So I'm not seeing any affordability, a solution to the affordability problem in terms of the supply coming from existing home sales. So I think it really has to come from new home construction. Of course, right now the sellers are offering a lot of concessions. But even then, there's also another headwind, and that headwind is a lot of our developers are building single family homes for rent, the single family rental market. So instead of, building for a home, using those resources to build a home, they're building it for rent. Of course, it's another issue like, hey, why do I need to live in a home, right? And a home that I own, I could rent it out, I could be more mobile. Of course, that's another issue, but we do know that home ownership has really been the greatest source of wealth for most people, right? It's not the stock market that will affect the wealth of fewer wealthy, but for most people, it's home ownership. And we know that home ownership, leads to other social benefits. You can tap on that equity to educate your children. They'll move up the income ladder. You have more stability, makes you more civic conscious. So a lot of the other benefits of home ownership.
I would like to get into in a second. I do want to say something to defend single family rental. But before that, though, one other challenge, you were noting some of the challenges of the problems with affordability. Another thing, we have a huge proportion of the market where people are stuck in old mortgages. If you bought your house in 2021 and you got a 3% mortgage, in some sense, you can't afford to leave now because even if you have some equity, that next mortgage you're going to get on maybe a nicer, bigger place is going to be out of reach, just given how rates have changed. And although there is a solution in the works, the Bill Pulte, the director of FHFA, had a comment the other day that they're looking at portable mortgages. One of the benefits working here at MSCI and actually being in the city and being around folks, just at the coffee machine, I got to meet our head of, got to know our head of fixed income research and securitized research rather. This guy David, you just talk to him, get a glass of tea, and talk about what he's working on, and he'd just been fiddling with that problem more in an intellectual pursuit, and he figured out like the math behind the RMBS security offerings and figure out how you can involve credit enhancements to make a mortgage portable, as they are in Sweden, to then allow someone who has a mortgage that was written in a 3 to take that into the next asset. And if that's actually implemented, if they really do follow through and follow that math that David outlined, you could see a good portion of the market suddenly open up again as people are able to take those and move around. So hopefully, that's one solution that might unstick some of the single family market.
Yeah, we've been, talking about the affordability. I mean, that's, the topic du jour. The mayors who won in the recent election, the ones that were not, I guess, thought to be mainstream in terms of their views, won, and probably number one on the list was affordability. So is there anything in the DC metro area or in the Miami area that you see being done where affordability is being addressed and it's working?
Yeah. I think, in our market, I'll jump in because I think there's been a lot of talk about, we know a lot about maybe programs to develop multifamily housing, the LIHTC program, by many measures has been successful in producing units for a certain folks at a certain income level. Getting home ownership options off the ground it's harder, right, to get that done. In Arlington County, though, they have joined Minneapolis to revise their single family zoning, right, to allow the construction of duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes by right in single family zoning districts. It's sort of light touch density, right? So where a builder could come in and instead of tearing down the bungalow and putting up a $2.5 million single family home, they could run the numbers and find if they built a duplex, they could then still generate the same or more profit, but get 2 units that would come in at slightly lower price points. Still, the jury's still out on how much that would have an impact on affordability. The thing I find interesting about this effort, which seems to make a lot of sense, this light touch density in terms of increasing housing supply for homeownership, it's happening in a county that is probably one of the most liberal counties in America. And the residents are suing and saying, we don't want you to do that because not in my, that sounds like a great idea to build more housing, but not here, right? You didn't meet here in my neighborhood. And so I think this is going to be really interesting to watch because if this is the kind of obstacle that this very light touch density policy is having in one of the most liberal counties in America, you can imagine how this effort is going to take some time so that folks can understand what the benefits might be. And then frankly, to come to consensus about what if there are negative impacts, how small they might be or whether they are there at all. One of the things I find most interesting is the biggest argument for this policy is adult children of people who live in Arlington County cannot move back home, right? Cannot move into the community in which they grew up. And so that's been one of the most compelling arguments to bring people along. But this light touch density, this missing middle, for lack of a better word, has been one of the things that communities in the DC area are looking at for increasing housing supply.
Yeah, are you seeing anything working?
Yes, in the at least in the whole of Florida area, and you know, 2 years ago, I think that was 2 or 3 years ago, the Live Local Act was just passed, the bill with the largest funding to accelerate the development of housing. I think it has more to do also with again, subsidizing construction of new development. I'm not sure if there's a lot there about rezoning, but it has to do with providing more funding for, like, for example, the government programs that fund, for example, for condos, right? Condos are condos are a very affordable option in Florida. You know, they're half the price of a single family home. But of course, what has happened with the Surfside collapse is people are now shunning condos because of the higher cost of the assessment fees, and that you have to put down those assessment fees. So one of the initiatives is to help these condo owners, help the condo owners with this wind mitigation, hurricane mitigation, and then also providing some financial relief for condo associations by now allowing them to fund those structural integrity reserves, not with outright outlays from the condo owners, but allowing them to obtain a loan or a line of credit. Of course, down the line, you have to keep paying that loan, right? But at least this does not give condo owners that initial sticker price. So I think that's one way. The other, which is still in the works, probably controversial, is lowering those property taxes. Florida loves to reduce property taxes. Governor DeSantis has said, a blanket removal of property taxes. I don't know where that will lead, but other bills have come forth, more toned down. Like one proposal just calls for reducing the property taxes for people 65 and over, because they live on fixed incomes, right? So in that sense, that makes sense. If you're 65 and older living on fixed income, freezing the property tax could be one way, and the other is the tax portability, the property tax portability. So when you own a home, you incur capital, you incur that equity, and when you buy another home, you could sorry, I'm not stating this correctly. So property taxes are capped. The appraisal of the property tax is capped. Even if home values increase by 10%, your appraisal value only increases by 3%, right? So there's a difference between the market value and the appraised value. So that difference is what is portable. So when you buy another home elsewhere, you can bring that difference and then apply it on your new home so that your property tax doesn't jump right away. Those are the initiatives.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm a bit worried about all that though, because like the law of unintended consequences. Look at California way back in the day, Prop 13, trying to limit property tax increases. And I mean, it had one impact, but it's also made for far less mobility in the housing market, because people don't want to. I mean, the portability to be able to get something, that's great, but that's not the only problem. The other problem is, how do you actually fund services? And so then it becomes much more of a fee-driven thing. Developers get soaked a lot of times and so that limits the housing development that we need in many of these markets, because you're going to make it, if that's your way of, pay more impact fees to cover the fact that you're not getting as much revenue from other sources, that becomes a problem. I mean, and the other option is the one that you really can't address in Florida, is an income tax. And that would be that's the other way to fund services, and it's just not going to happen. So I worry about like what other types of things they're going to have to do to find revenue to make up for limiting property taxes. And because that can have some unintended consequences. Yeah, trying to make it portable, that might solve the problem that happened in California, but then you have to have revenue from someplace else. And where is that coming from? And that's playing games with taxation systems. You create new incentives for the market and disincentives, and I don't think everybody knows how they play out.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so that's why, there's this other 9 bills, that are being put forward to, to tone down the objective of Governor DeSantis. So certainly, yes, that is a major issue, right? How do you fund other, revenues? Like if you have people migrating to the area, you need good schools. Right now, traffic is becoming more difficult, more congested in the Miami area. So, you need good transportation as well. So, yeah, so certainly, you need those revenues. And I think that's why there was a lot of pushback with that idea. And so these other 9 bills surfaced to mitigate, the revenue impact of that proposal.
I mean, just an observation, and this is not at anyone, but realistically, no one was able to say program ABC has been implemented and it's working.
Right.
And I think that no matter how much discussion and money seems to be thrown at the problem or the challenge, we're trying to figure out, Band-Aids and toothpicks to try to fix the issue. And I don't, Jim, I was going to ask you, have you seen it anywhere where someone actually has some formula where it seems that something seems to be working and they're able to actually create something that's affordable, that's not taxpayers paying it for someone else to be able to live, and it's not really a self-sustaining program?
Tokyo. National zoning code, local busybodies can't come in on a local development board and shut down construction. On a rent per square foot basis, a dense, highly concentrated city like Tokyo, you're paying half per square foot of what you pay in New York. And that's even after you take into account the currency differences. Living here in New York, I live in Brooklyn, and I'll head over to Bushwick, where all the hipster artist folks are. A lot of them are trying to migrate over to Tokyo because they could do their art and live their crazy lives and not have to pay so much in rent. That's the problem with these cities. One of the reasons why Miami is so great, just the culture, the music. There's a little coffee place I like going to when I have some free time. You can get just the best Cuban coffee, and there's just the life, the music, but you price those folks out, and then and replace that with a Chick-fil-A. You're removing the spirit and creativity of the city, and just having fewer regulatory barriers allows the market to deliver the number of units that are needed, and keep things in equilibrium.
Yeah, I mean, because we're not in Japan, I think the question of what can we do given that we're in the United States of America.
Yeah,
I do think, though, that the bypassing local opposition to new residential construction is key. And so the extent to which the states should, I believe, take a larger role in driving housing policy when it's been traditionally left to like a Tuesday night zoning meeting in the local jurisdiction. And those local elected officials answer to the people who live there, not to the people who want to live there. And so they don't have really any incentive politically to expand housing options for folks who don't live in their community. But in a place like Massachusetts, where they have tinkered with a program that bypasses local review when a certain threshold of housing hasn't been constructed in the community, I sort of feel like that's the way these things have to go. Because as you point out, Jim, the amount of mostly local regulation that is bumping up the cost of delivering housing is critical. And so, and to your point, Constantine, it's like you talked about like Band-Aids and stuff. I also like to think about it, this is maybe a little more optimistic, and I don't mean to be Pollyanna, but like you need to have a bunch of quivers or arrows in your quiver or whatever.
Yeah,
like, right?
yeah.
You need to combine things because there is no one silver bullet.
Yep.
In our community, for example, in the DC Metro, using publicly owned land to offset some of the cost of delivering housing to allow those prices to be lower is very, very common. It has been very, very successful on a 1 or 2 basis. It's not going to work for every type of housing price point that you need to reach, but it needs to be part of the law, the set of policies that get adopted.
I think
I
in
can't-
Miami-Dade, sorry, go,
Oh,
Jim.
go ahead, Greg, go ahead.
Yeah, I think in Miami-Dade, there is that program, so just Miami-Dade County, right? So it's not the state intervening over the county. The county overpowering the neighborhoods. Transit-oriented development areas, I think they've designated areas that are transit-oriented development. The locals do not have that that power. So it is the county that can dictate the zoning for that area. So yeah, I agree, you know, that's really a positive move. And then of course, other things like, you know, we've always talked about this manufactured homes, right? I mean, I guess we need to remove that mindset that a manufactured home is an ugly home. I mean, there's been a lot of development there. At DC, every year they have the builder show, and you see these manufactured homes, and you know, they're no longer your like shabby looking homes, right? So
Right.
that's one way. So I think has to be both on the zoning and then new technology that will construct that cheaply, and of course use of federal lands. I haven't done much research about this, but certainly any use of public land or federal land to build housing is something that will increase supply, because as I said, I don't think you can get that additional affordable housing from the resale of existing homes. There's no way you can get that supply.
Well,
I just want to interject that, Lisa, I just can't agree enough with your comment that you can't think of this as one solution for everything. One thing can't solve everything. A lot of people come in with that mentality. We change this one thing and everything is different. An organization, I think that gets that and has an interesting, innovative way of highlighting this. A conservative think tank in Massachusetts, the Beacon Hill Institute, to increase the competitiveness of the state. They talk about all the different features that go into making businesses competitive, and they just rank Massachusetts on these categories. Their notion on that is always never like fix all this and give us everything we want. It's like just move the needle incrementally across a number of things. You need some thoughts on incrementalism to kind of get you in the right direction, moving in a bunch of directions at once. And you know, Gay, this notion of like counties overriding locals, that's you know, in some sense, I think we're probably nationally gone too far in that direction, given too much local control. I mean, like in New York, for instance, we had the history. Everyone has read The Power Broker, talking about Robert Moses, and how we had just way too much concentration of power, versus Jane Jacobs, who wanted, you know, every little community to have their say and be able to control the local community and be able to have some greenery. And in some sense, we need a child of Jane Jacobs and Robert Moses together making decisions on these things.
Well, we're almost at the bottom of the hour. For me, I always knew that there's an additional cost for regulation, let's call it oversight, the no factor. 40% is not a number I would have gotten right on a quiz. So sounds like that's a place where if you can reduce 40 to 20, you can make things 20% more affordable.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, that is, the NMHC has a paper on that. And actually, another example of folks who are starting to understand that and starting to pull that back. If you look at the United States and our migration and the housing costs, it is nothing compared to the problems they've had in Canada. They had a much more open migration system, but they had a more sclerotic housing development and regulatory environment. So the affordability of housing really went down there. It's become a very difficult political problem.
Yeah.
An interesting thing, now I have a business interest in this because our data partner in Canada is this organization RealPAC, but Michael Brooks there, I can't say enough good things about them. That guy, he's a lawyer, knows everybody in Canada. He got the heads of the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party to sit down in a room, no cell phones, no social media cancer, just sit down like adults and talk to each other like adults about the problem we faced. And they came up with the National Housing Accord, some consensus on areas where they can move the needle. And the first thing they did, they immediately reduced the cost of building new construction, building new homes by 15% by eliminating a double taxation of developers at the country and provincial level. And just having the political leaders not shouting at each other on Twitter to score points, but instead like talking to each other as adults on how they can solve the problems of society. It's really helped the Canadians. But that's Canada. Again, to Lisa's point earlier, can we get that here?
Maybe. Luckily, this is a topic that it was very challenging for us to fill an hour with our discussion. I literally got to like 3 of my
Right?
questions, which is great because it means the discussion's working. Last minute, are there any other questions? We got one that we try to incorporate into our discussion. Any other questions that anyone would like to ask before we bid everyone a good afternoon and good weekend?
Well, maybe we could do another one sometime. If there's no more questions now, we can do another one sometime with the rest of your questions, but maybe we could do it live in Miami over some Cuban coffees.
I love it. I love it. I'm there.
I'm good with that. For those of you who joined and have been listening in, thank you very much. Of course, to our panel, Lisa, Gay, Jim. Jim, I know for a long time, it's always a pleasure, Jim, but Lisa and Gay, it was great to meet you through this process, and thank you very much for your support and time. Hopefully everyone found this useful. Please give us feedback. We've recorded it and it'll get posted. Please share it and let everyone know who didn't join what they missed. And, on that point, thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend and be safe, and look forward to seeing everyone in person.
Thank you.
Thanks, and thanks, Andrew, for organizing. Thanks.
Yes. Oh, Andrew, thank you, Gay. Andrew, thank you very much for pulling this together. Great group, and thank you for making me look good by putting me in to ask questions and let the smart people do the talking.
You always look good, Tino.
Thank you.
So
I wore
Thank you.
my green today.